There we go.
Hello, everyone. A very good evening. So, today we are here with our District 9 Congress candidate, Tony Amador. District 9 comprises of San Joaquin County, portion of Contra Costa, and Sacramento counties. So, today I have the pleasure to have the co host, Mr. Hardiman. Hardiman, he is a substantial corporate expertise in many multinational companies, currently working as a financial advisor in AAA, so very much active in our community, serves as an ambassador for Tracy Chamber of Commerce. In 2019, he was awarded a community award as Ambassador of the Year. So, and I'm very much proud to share. So, Hardy and I have the same Alumni Institute and Engineering Institute that is based in India, Punjab, Guru Nanak Dev Engineering College. He graduated in 1972 and in 1974 came here, University of Kansas, and pursued many degrees in business administration. Now, I'll pass it on to Hardy to please welcome and share us with our guest.
Thank you, Gurtej. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to Antonio Amador, our guest today. And we are going to ask him, he's a Republican candidate for the 9th Congressional District, and he has run this race before, and is running against a sitting congressman. And so I'm going to ask him to introduce himself a little bit, tell us about himself.
I think by telling you about myself, it tells you a lot about some of my positions. For instance, I was born in Murray, Utah. My parents were immigrants, legal immigrants from Mexico, and I was number 12 of 14 children. I have been married. I moved to California, but I have been married for 55 years. I have 15 grandchildren, 4 daughters, and 3 great-grandchildren. I started my professional career because I had a number of jobs, but my professional career started with LAPD, and I was there for nearly 13 years. And I wrote the first contract because they mandated that police officers bargain for their benefits. And so I wrote the first contract with the city of Los Angeles and me representing the police officers. I had had previous experience as a union member for Douglas Aircraft Corporation. But I spent 13 years, and when I left, it was a very, very tough decision because at that time, there was no portability, no reciprocity, no return of contributions that I had made, and we were exempt from the Social Security Administration requirements. So I walked away with absolutely nothing. Folks told me, you could always, with all the arrests you've made, and you've been in a very active position, you can have a disability pension. I said, no, one day I may want to run for office, and I'm not going to phony up a disability pension. So I walked away. And the reason I walked away was to come to state government. And I am a lifetime Republican, but the person who I had offered me a job was Jerry Brown the first time that he was around. He was a Democrat, but he knew that I had pushed very hard for a police officer's Bill of Rights. At that time, police officers did not have a procedural due process. You could fire them if they wouldn't take a poly. They didn't even have to be told what they were charged with if they were being investigated. And we knew that that wasn't fair. And so I moved and had a police officer's Bill of Rights under Jerry Brown's administration. So I took a leave of absence, and eventually I left and worked in his administration. He's not the first governor I worked for, because I worked for Duke Majan, a Republican, Pete Wilson, a Republican, Gray Davis, a Democrat. And so I had numerous jobs. I've been very honored to have those different administrative positions. They've been in high-level positions, ranging from director of the California Youth Authority to chairman of the Youthful Offender Parole Board, a member of the Narcotic Addict Evaluation Authority, and also I had worked for the Employment Development Department as a deputy director. And that's, I got a lot of experience other than personal experience because agriculture is a big part of this district. And so by my introduction, I'm going to tell you about how I feel about certain things. Of course, it's estimated a third of all employment comes from agricultural in this district. And I have topped onions, I've thinned beets, I've worked in agriculture, not as much as my older brothers in that. I was fortunate not to have to. So I understand agriculture, and I, excuse me, from that I learned what farm labor contractors were and what was going on. And at that time, I had responsibility of making sure that employers were allowing employees to have access to employment development department services. I went from there. At that time, I also went to law school. I went to McGeorge Law School and have a degree. I fortunately did not pass the bar. Otherwise, I'd have to be practicing law. In all seriousness, I did not pass the bar, but my daughter has passed the bar, and I've told her, "How do you like that nasty business being an attorney?" But it's a noble profession. But I had other opportunities. I was offered to go to Washington, D.C. to work for H.W. Bush as a member of the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board, which was a United States Senate confirmed position. So I lived in Washington, D.C. for 7 years. I came back and worked and finished out my state employment with Gray Davis from transition from Pete Wilson, I believe it was at that time. I was then called to Washington for an interview to become the United States Marshal for the Eastern District of California. The Eastern District runs from Bakersfield all the way to the Oregon border. It runs from the Nevada border west to Vallejo, that area. And I was a United States Marshal for 7 years. And since then, I had moved down to Lodi. I was interested in running as a representative, not as a politician. And so I have run. I do make Lodi my home. I have, I've been here going on 11 years now, and I intend to stay. But that's basically my background. I've worked for both parties. Positions I've had weren't partisan as much as they were high-level management positions that I proved myself. So it's a great country with great opportunities, and I've been the beneficiary of that, and I'm very appreciative of it. I felt like I have something to give back, and so that's why I ran this time, even though I had not run last time 2 years ago. And I nearly upset the incumbent of 14 years in 2014. It was a very close race. It wasn't until after the polls had closed. And he had substantially more money than I have. I am not a rich person, and so I do not garner a lot of money. So with that, I'm prepared to, if you want me to go right into some of the issues that I think are important, I can start unless you want to ask me a specific question.
We do. Let me start by asking you, based on the needs for the 9th district, what do you think are the key issues people are looking to resolve?
Well, the 9th district has been ignored, and I'm going to give you an example of being ignored. It's not purposeful. Unfortunately, it's political. The representative, without beating him up, had a project, a veterans project, to build a veterans home. It has been about 14 years, and they turned a spade full of dirt a few months ago before COVID hit. Well, what had happened is the money that had been allocated, because it was a good project, it's a good piece of legislation he had. It's very needed here, veteran services. Otherwise, they had to go over the Altamont Pass to Palo Alto to get extensive or better treatment. Well, what happened is, because they had other priorities and the Republicans thought other things were more important, money was diverted. Without the money, a piece of legislation is nothing. Well, what happened during this interim is a veteran from the Air Force, Jeff Denham, was elected to office. And with his muscle and his help, they finally approved the project, and that's why it moved. And the reason that's important is because I have worked with both parties. You have to work with both parties to get legislation passed. And so this district has been neglected in many ways. We have not had, and I'll give you another example that I think is lengthy, but it's important. It's important to repeat this. I recall living in Huntington Beach, California, when I worked with LAPD. I would drive to work that would take about 45 minutes to travel about 40 miles. Today, you can't get to downtown Los Angeles in probably less than 2 hours. We have the same challenge here. We have very good, even though we want to create jobs here on this side of the valley, there are very, very good jobs on the other side of the valley, high-paying jobs. The investment is tremendous, and I took some notes down. I won't go into them now. But those folks that are seeking employment on the other side, those, I don't know how many billion industry, $32 billion industry, I mean, they represent about 17 to 20% of the tax base for the state of California. Anyway, those people want the jobs, but they don't want to travel 3 or 4 hours a day. It takes away the quality of living. And so we have rail transportation, we have highway transportation, and those need to be improved going over the Altamont Pass. We are not, by the time these people, we create jobs and bring jobs to the valley, those jobs are high paying. People are going to want them, and they're going to want to keep them, but they're sacrificing personal time in their lives. And I think that doing taking a trip, an annual trip to Washington, D.C., and lobbying them, as I think as recently, it's going on 2 years now, I think it was May of 2019, they wrote a letter to Elaine Chao, who's head of transportation. They wanted to move these projects forward. And so Jerry McNerney, the incumbent, I think Josh Harder, I think Swalwell was part of that letter. They wrote a letter to her saying, we would like to elevate the importance of being able to get to the BART, because from BART in Dublin, you can go in further into the Silicon Valley for those other jobs. Well, that letter's been sitting there, and just talking about it doesn't get things done. You're going to have to get the other side of the party to endorse and support that. And I think I'm that vehicle to be able to work on accomplishing those things. We can't afford to wait 14 more years to have the infrastructure added to. And I know there are people that have the acronym is BUILD, to utilize resources in a better manner for transportation. Those are things that would be beneficial to the valley. That's just one.
Sure. Gurtej, you want to pick up?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for highlighting the transportation aspect. So there are job opportunities that 100,000 approximately people have to travel out of Central Valley on every day across the Altamont Pass. So one thing that the voters and we were thinking is there is lack of higher educational facilities across the districts, so that the students, they are going across the Altamont Pass either to Sac State or to San Jose State or to the CSU Hayward. So then the companies, they kind of tend to come near the institutes or the higher educational institutes. So from the educational institute aspect, in Mountain House, we have a smaller campus that Delta College owns. So we don't have much higher educational institutes here. So what is your thought process with that perspective now, and how do you see the future in that direction?
Well, the emphasis on putting another state university had been proposed, and you have a great institution in UOP. You have Stanislaus, and you have a Stanislaus unit also here. But if you can't fill a community college, if the enrollment is down there, it's hard to justify a 4-year university when you can't get the community colleges filled. And that's happening now. It is nice, it's idyllic to say the reason we do not have these good jobs is because we don't have the infrastructure of a university to support that. But apparently we have people sufficiently qualified that they're going over. I estimate 86 to 100,000 people are going over to those tech jobs. And their only reason they're not staying there is because they can't afford the housing. And that's why we have Tracy and Mountain House that have been created. I went to Mountain House very recently. I can't believe the growth in the number of homes that are being built there, because people can afford it. It's affordable housing for them, and they're paying. And if they want to and they choose to work over there because they have the freedom to do that, salaries are very good. we should at least improve the transportation so they can come back before it's nighttime and not have to leave before sunrise. When you're spending that amount of time on the road, you're not really serving your family very, very well. And so I'm a very strong advocate of that.
All right. You want to pick up on the homelessness, Cortez?
Yeah, so the homelessness, quarter of the population that is across the United States, they live in California. And that is becoming one of the issues, especially in this era that we have with the COVID, where the affordability is decreasing. So in the future, we will see the problem more increasing. So what do you think where we are and how do you see the future in the homelessness aspect?
Well, without making light of it, it's a very, very serious problem. I'll get into it in a minute. But every time we'd have the Rose Bowl parade and the Rose Bowl football game, and teams would come out from Michigan and Ohio, they'd see the sunny skies of Pasadena. California is an attraction. California is a beautiful state. Well, in a way, when you offer services that are Cadillac plans for homelessness, it becomes a magnet also. And when you have rules that say, you know what, we'll just pick up your needles, we're not going to enforce certain laws and things like that, then they feel safe here. Because if you were to first analyze who a homeless person is, it's not a crime to be homeless. You don't arrest them and put them in jail. You have to evaluate first. There's a certain percentage that have narcotic and drug addictions. There are people that have mental problems. Many years ago, we released them all out of the institutions and put them out into the streets. We have veterans who have needs and also have been addicted to drugs. Now you are seeing children out there. And so we do need a place for them. We do need to help them, but we first have to analyze who they are. Because a person who wants to use drugs and continue to use that has a habit, if they don't want to be helped, then we're going to have legislation to back up the fact that there will be a mandatory detox program perhaps, but there is no legislation to enforce anything. And so it's not a crime to be addicted to drugs, but it's certainly something that you could help them mandatorily. If you go to court, you just don't put them back out on the streets again. And so the homelessness issue, we have good weather, we have good benefits as far as we're very charitable, we try to help those people, but they are not all the same issue. A woman who's living in a car because she lost a job and she has her children with her, she needs housing. That's a different type of a person than someone who has mental problems who has come out of the military. You're not going to jail someone who has been in the military. But the hardcore ones that like that as a lifestyle and like to use drugs, they have to be dealt with. And so the homeless issue will continue to be it until we begin to put some muscle behind the ability to help people.
All right. Thank you. Let's move on to a little bit different area. The country is seized by the COVID-19 and it's impacting the economy in a big manner, of course, the safety, and because people are curtailed in their homes, and it's also increasing the mental health issues over time, and people love to go to work or do things they enjoy. How do you see this, us getting out of it? What do we need to do to minimize the damage so we can come out at the end faster if we can?
And now, I'm not a doctor, but I believe that they are doing everything possible. They're going to create a vaccine that will help people. From an economic standpoint, I think there are sufficient safeguards that people can open up businesses more. You can't have a mandate that says you can have 1/4 of your customers come back to work. If you can establish that your social distancing properly, that you're using masks except to eat. It's stupid to think you'd have to try to eat with a mask on. But I think the strictures are too tight. I think they have to be loosened up. Some of these businesses will never come back. And I think that we have done everything possible from a federal level. And I think from a local level, we can't utilize people like police officers to go around and arrest people who aren't wearing masks. I abhor the day that I as a senior citizen go outside and I'm stopped by a law enforcement officer who says, well, Mr. Amador, you're a little bit older. Do you have a pass to be out? Do you have a health card? Let me check your chip. And so those things are frightening if we're going to try to control the population that way. I think we have to open up the businesses, give people, businessmen, the courtesy of understanding that they will do what is right to not increase a very serious flu. But I don't think we can keep staying locked down and expect to have a better result. I don't think by paying people more than they would receive on unemployment is an answer. It's a disincentive for people to go back to work. And so there are a lot of people that want to work, a lot of businesses that want to work. The state of South Dakota never shut down ever, and they were a success. And so we're seeing right now that we're able to open up a lot more than I think we have been opening up. And so the devastation that's done from an economic standpoint is terrible.
A lot of people have run out of unemployment, and you are opposed to, I think there was a $600 in the stimulus package, the CARE Act, and you don't support that, but you clearly said that.
No, I did not even use the word 600. I said we cannot pay people. There are people that could go back to work that would rather not go back to work and receive unemployment benefits. And that's a disincentive. I think we should let people go back to work.
Yeah.
I don't think we can continue printing money forever and going deeper and deeper into debt. I think we have to open up the economy. I think that's the solution.
Okay. Well, there's a safety issue that if the resurgence of the infections come about you believe we should open it more safely. There should be safety safeguards built into that, and the opening should be tied to the safeguards.
Yes, I think you should use some common sense, which most people have, as far as the safeguard you're talking about. If masks are a safeguard, as social distancing is a safeguard. But I think we have waited too long. I think we should have begun to open up sooner.
All right. Okay. Let's take you to a little different direction, because being a congressman is a national, responsibility. Even though you represent your district, the decisions you make have a national impact. Our country, I think most of the people will agree that is at this time is so much divided. And our political course is kind of not healthy. And people are into their corners. They work as within the party rather than solving the national problems. How do you deal with that? How do you turn it back so we can work as one nation?
We are one nation, but people have to understand there's a little bit of education that has to be done also. With my extensive law enforcement background, I'm familiar with Black Lives Matter, but I also am familiar with Antifa. And I know that we're not a democracy, we're a republic. And so we're based on law. We have unalienable rights to, for instance, go to church. I don't think abortion clinics are as important as opening up someone's job or being able to practice your faith. Now, when you talk about division, the division is fomented by people who I will unashamedly call socialists, Marxists, communists. They're all synonymous. And if they can bring down and create social disorder by attacking local police and creating havoc, then they have won. The communists would call those demonstrating useful idiots. Some of them have legitimate complaints and legitimate demonstrations, but you cannot allow folks to take out businesses of people who have worked their whole lives. If you look at some of the cities and you can't control, if you have lawlessness, you have no order in our country. So the division sometimes happens from the media feeding the frenzy. You have people in some of these cities that aren't taking lawlessness serious enough and trying to stop people from committing crimes. Now, from my law enforcement background, part of the problems that we're having have been stoked by misbeliefs, I'll say, from, let's say, a poor police tactic. In my professional career, leaning on someone's neck was not something that you saw law enforcement, by and large, think was a good tactic. But that's not an excuse to burn down buildings. It's not an excuse to attack police. It's not an excuse to disband law enforcement. If you disband local law enforcement, then you are bringing in federal police. Now, they call them fascists in Germany. They call them the Stasi in other countries. We don't want that. We want to protect local police. We want to have law and order. It's very important. And the division that's happening is because people are funding people to get right out of jail. They get arrested and they're released immediately. There are folks that are making a mockery of law and order. And if you don't have this in this country, then you're going to have anarchy, and then eventually you're going to have socialism because someone has to control the masses. And so
what do you think our police chiefs around the country are doing to make the necessary changes so if on a street doesn't have to die from being suffocated by the knee of a police officer?
I think that has to do with training, but you have to understand there's two types of training. In California, we have a very good professional training unit. They don't have it in that state, obviously, because that wouldn't have happened. That wouldn't be a technique. Now, when you delve into that issue a lot more, you'll find out that he couldn't breathe long before. You'll find out how many drugs he had into it. You'll find out that he was in the police car and asked to come back out, which doesn't, in the very least, negate the bad reputation that the police officer had. A police officer had a number of complaints against him, probably should have been fired into his 5th, 6th, or 7th, but I think he had in the number of teens excessive force or bad complaints against him. So as far as training, you want to have some training, but you don't want them mandated. Look at our Department of Education. How's that work from the federal government? We don't want the federal government setting guidelines and controlling our police officers. That's the worst thing that can happen. And so there is training that's needed. And in these other states, there has to be training. There are law enforcement assistance programs, a LEAP program, where they would give them better training. But having been trained as a police officer, U.S. Marshal, state agencies, I understand that training is important. But people don't like to hear it. Statistically, people that are dying from shootings, whether they're black or minorities, are dying at a less proportion than people are claiming that they're dying for. It's astronomical, the number of contacts that are made compared to the number of deaths that result from a shooting. It is a proven fact that a white police officer is more apt to be killed by a black citizen with a gun than the other way. But because the media has just blown this out of proportion, they have created a split in our society rather than bringing us together. They have a big role to play, and you can see that they're not doing it. I can look from one station or two stations and flip over to two other stations, and it is completely different. And so they have a powerful role to play in bringing our country back together.
So we are in this COVID-19 situation, and at the national level, there's a lot of views about if the election could be fair, unfair, and the mail order, the voting by mail, which has been in California for a long time, and people have to do that because they don't want to die going to a polling place. Do you support that voting by mail is safe and it will lead to a fair outcome?
If I had to wait 1 hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours to vote in person wearing a mask, I'd feel very safe. Now, we don't want to create panic by saying it's unsafe to vote. People should vote. What has happened, and it's happened here in California, and I'll give you an actual example. I went to a location and someone said, "How much do I get for my vote?" I said, "What?" I said, "I'm here to get your support." He says, "Well, we have 8 people here. We got $25 last time." So it really happens. I mean, we're naive if we think that there aren't people who are selling their votes. I think it's not to the point where we should not go and vote because of COVID. I think that's terrible scare tactic to break down our republic. I think people should feel comfortable. I think it's safe enough to vote in person also.
But we in California, I have been voting through by mail for many years. A lot of Californians do that. And why can't it extend to other states the same way? If it's safe here, has been safe here, it can be safe at other places.
So you're not talking about the ballots that were found dumped. Remember one thing, I work for the Merit System Protection Board. My biggest client was a U.S. Postal Service. And when we had tons of mail dropped, or we had, and they weren't isolated. Most of the cases were the Postal Service that we had problems with. People would die if they realized how many shenanigans go on. Because it works in California, your vote by mail, and you ask for a absentee ballot and you want to mail it in, that's your right. But to mandate everybody to do that and not allow me, who disagrees with the way you vote, because I'd rather go down and vote in person, I should have that right. So are we going to transport what is successful here somewhere else and mandate that they do it when they prefer to vote in person? California is a very big state, and we have a lot of problems in voting here. We have people that are harvesting ballots. They were doing it illegally. Now there's a legal methodology for harvesting ballots, but it has been done illegally. And we can have a whole conversation about that later on about the voting process. But I would encourage that, for my part, I think people ought to vote in person. But if you prefer yours be mailed, fine. I respect that also.
Okay. Cortez, you have something?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Tony. So coming back to the local prominent issue that we have, water related to agriculture, because 1 out of 3 jobs that we have in Central Valley, they are dependent on agriculture. And there are always talks of tunnels or shuttling water to Southern California. So what is your take on that? So from the perspective of water for the Central Valley farmers now and in future?
Well, I've studied this a little bit, and enough to not be the expert, but enough to know quite honestly what happens. We have an annual rainfall. We have an annual ice melt, a snow melt. We have so much water that goes out into the ocean. We don't want salt intrusion into a beautiful delta that we have. So there has to be a certain amount of water that goes out, but we flush a lot out because, and I'm not oversimplifying it, we don't have storage. We don't have sufficient storage. Now, as far as shipping our water south from the delta and ruining the ecosystem and what is here, I'm not for that. I'm not for the tunnel. It's now one tunnel. I'm not for that. But I think there's enough if we would begin to build and have storage. Storage in water, we used to have hydroelectric power. We didn't have to depend on, I mean, during these fires, for the backup energy that PG&E needed, there was no solar, there's no sun, there was no wind. So the alternative energy sources weren't there. Now, we do a good job in the United States. We don't want to burn coal. But when you have China and India with 550 coal-powered plants online to be built, I think we need a little bit more cooperation from them. I believe that nuclear power is safe. They have smaller nuclear plants that can be built. They're expensive, but they're clean energy and they're very effective. I think we can't give up on that. I think that's something we have to look at. But as far as the farmers right now, they're overregulated and they're overtaxed. And then they have the need for water also. And I think that we have to supply that water. And it's not to ignore the Central Valley, because I think we could supply water there also if we had sufficient storage. But everybody is opposed to storage, and I don't know why. But that's something I feel very strong about. We could raise the level of dams, we could build other dams, but if it's between a human being and a salamander living, or if it's between some rare animal and a person who works the farms and needs the water, I will pick that. And that's what's happened. Is I think we have had a great deal of environmental influence to the point where the fires, when we talk about the fires being caused because of climate change, yet we've never really done forest management the way it should be. Never cut out the undergrowth. I lived and had a home up in Amador County, and I couldn't believe that they were not taking care of the power lines when trees were growing right into it. And so you have the undergrowth. Timber industry was beautiful. We had a great timber industry, and it was managed well, and they would do some cuttings. That's contributed a lot to some of these fires. It's coincidental also that some of these fires attributed to climate change happen along the freeways or stop at the Canadian border. We have people setting fires purposely out there. And that's another factor that we have to deal with. But I don't think that the fires that have been created are all because of climate change.
What do you mean by forest management? Because a lot of the land for the forest is owned by the federal government. Should the federal government be doing that, or the state should be doing that?
I think it should be a partnership. The federal government does own most of it. We have a lot of forestry that has to be, let the timber industry go in. They've done very good clear cutting, and they've been good environmentalists, to tell you the truth, because it was a good business. I think the undergrowth that needs to be cut should be cut back. I think there are insurance companies that have just stopped insuring certain homes because they don't have enough of a safety area that they've cut back from. So there is a federal responsibility. I agree with you on that, Hardy. And I think it has to be a joint effort. It can't be one or the other. They cannot be pointing fingers at each other as if both are exempt from responsibility.
Right. Let me turn to, let's say, there's an election coming soon. So either it's you or Congressman Jerry McNerney. If you win, what would you do differently the 2 years you are given to be the next congressman?
You got to limit me to 2 years?
Yeah. Well, let's suppose that happened. And what would you do differently? Tell me 3 things you would do differently, which will have a substantial impact on the lives of people in the 9th District.
The 3 things that I would, if you limit me to 3, I'll tell you 3. There are more differences than that between Jerry and I, between Congressman McNerney. But one thing, I would not be a politician, I would be a representative. And by that, I would not give my vote by proxy to a congressman in Maryland. Number one, I'd show up to work if I was going to get paid. Second, I think that I have a better possibility of working with both sides of the aisle. And my biggest accomplishment in 14 years wouldn't be stationing a post office, but I think I have the ability to work, and I've proven I can work with both parties, regardless of who has the majority and is in office. I have worked the farms. I've thinned beets. I've topped onions. I've picked cherries. I understand the farm industry. I also understand the farm owners and their challenges. My emphasis would not be on alternative energy. Mine would be on creating jobs for people that don't have quite the skills. Community colleges would be a big, big part of my emphasis to create. I mean, you can have a plumber who has a very respectable and a high paying trade. There's a lot of trades that could be developed. We got rid of any woodwork. We got rid of auto mechanics, even though they're mechanized and they're electronic now, but there are a lot of businesses that could be taught, and apprenticeship programs, working with unions and working through the community colleges. Those are things. I wouldn't just show up. I have, in the past, I have taken on my own party. I would not be a yes man. I think that's important. I will listen to people, and I have that experience and a cross section of experience that I think I would be a true representative. I would understand the difference between a democracy and a republic and what we are and what we stand for. I would not purport to be a person who is of a certain persuasion and yet support, and I'm on record, I would not support killing children even after they're born. So I'm a pro-life, not a pro-choice person. That differentiates me from him. I'm a very strong proponent of the Second Amendment and what its purpose was in the document, our federal Constitution, and it wasn't designed for deer hunters and duck hunters. It was in case we ever had to defend ourselves against a federal government that's gone bad. And so I support Second Amendment, which he does not. His interpretation of what it's about is different than mine. So there are a lot of differences between he and I.
Sure. So how far your position on Second Amendment go? Should we allow people willy-nilly to have weapons of war?
Well, you know, when you talk about weapons of war, are you talking about tanks? Are you talking about
No. The AR-15.
They are not weapons of war. If you know anything about weapons, that's a single-shot weapon. It's not a weapon of war. It has been used in war. I was in the Army and I had an AR, but that doesn't mean it's a weapon of war. A deer hunting rifle could be used as a weapon of war also if you went out deer hunting. So there's a misconception about what the Second Amendment is about and your right to bear arms. And it's not, I would be suspect if someone rolled up next to my neighbor with a tank or bought a bazooka. But we now have in California, we have background checks. We have waiting periods. They're even limiting the amount of ammunition you can buy. So they're already infringing on that. But I can live with that. I'm living with that in California. But it's not, I think it's an alarmist attitude that makes everybody think that an AR is a automatic weapon of war. It's not true.
Okay, well, thank you. You have the next one?
Yeah, so can we touch on the immigration system, the securing our borders? So as 10,000 dreamers, they live in Central Valley. So from the immigration system aspect, what do you think, what can be done better in future?
Well, you asked me a question that is directly stated in my statement of qualifications, which October 5th, they will begin mailing out. I addressed the dreamers specifically because the dreamers were people brought to this country as children. They had no vote in the matter. If those dreamers have contributed, have paid taxes, not been a burden, not committed felonies, and were model citizens, I think we should give them legal status and eventually a path to citizenship, but immediately not have them living in the dark and having to be second-class people. Those dreamers should be addressed. What has happened is both my party, the Republican Party, and the Democrats have used the dreamers as a bouncing ball. It's embarrassing to use that many people and go back and forth and say, oh, the only way we can settle this is to have a massive immigration reform bill. Well, no, there are bills that are passed that you can extricate that portion of it and pass it. And I think both Republicans and Democrats should get behind it. And they have both been derelict in their responsibilities in not addressing that issue. They have used them as a bouncing ball. Now, as far as security, you're not a country unless you control your borders. And controlling the borders means more than letting illegals cross the border. We have drugs coming in. Majority of the drugs that kill about 65,000 people a year in this country come from China through the southern border. We have cartels like MS-13, and only because I'm familiar with all my law enforcement background, we know that there are some gangs that are making more money by human bondage and using these folks as prostitutes rather than having to go back with cash, come back with drugs, and back and forth. And so you have gangs that find it better to have people cross the border and use them that way. So we need a secure border. Otherwise, we're not a nation. And it's more than just illegal immigrants. There's a lot of other issues that have to do with securing our border.
Thank you very much, Tony. Now I'll turn it back to Hardy. So if you have something in mind.
All right, maybe one or two more questions. I think we are at 7:48. A few more minutes. So I think you clearly laid out what you believe in, and you are pro-life. You mentioned that. How do you deal with a lot of people are concerned with the new judicial nominee, where she looks like a fine woman. That people are kind of scared about if there's a turning over of that Roe versus Wade, and that is like putting a lot of different people at unease. So I think I just ask you to reflect on that, keeping a country together versus just imposing one view, which is very divisive. Either way, both ways it got it. Whatever you want to add to that.
Now let me clear something up first. Liberal and conservative on the Supreme Court does not mean liberal in philosophy or conservative in philosophy. It means that the Constitution shall be followed, which is a strict constructionist conservative view, or will legislate from the bench. Congress's responsibility is to pass law. So she would be considered a strict interpreter of the Constitution the way the framers intended it. Now, modernly, that some of those things, we cannot live with those things. That wasn't the intent. And so the legislature, the Congress has to clean it up. The president signs it, and now it's new law. But do not make law from the court. And that's what's happened. We find that happen. Second, the decision to oppose her by many is based on the fact that she's a Catholic. I'm a lifetime Catholic. I think, regardless of your religion, and I don't know either one of your gentlemen's religion, but the Constitution says we shall not have a religious test for a Supreme Court justice. And so now we're going to throw that out also from some of the people that are opposed to her. She's probably one of the best qualified persons. And with my legal background, my experience, and the number of courts I've been in, from the federal to the state to the local level, she is going to be an excellent judge.
Okay. All right. You got one, Gurtej, while I think about the next, so then we'll close it.
Yeah, so last question from my side is we have touched all the aspects. So this is related to healthcare. So as the prescription drug prices, they are pretty high, affordable healthcare or Medicare for all. So what is your view on those and how better can those be made in future?
How we can drive down the drug prices?
Yes.
I think that I think the president is doing a good job. I don't think the pharmaceutical companies are really happy with him because he wants competition. Whenever you have competition in any type of a business, it's good. When you have a monopoly to control prices and charge exorbitant prices for drugs, you will take advantage of that. And that's what we're trying to eliminate. And that would be something that I would support. I think competition is very good. We should open it up. Why should people in other countries get the same exact pill and not have to pay what we are paying? Because I think the pharmaceutical companies aren't going to love me, but they're going to have they have a monopoly almost on the drugs. And I think they've run into a president who's saying, no, let's have competition. And so they're not too happy with him right now. And I think that's a good thing for our country.
All right. So I'm going to pick up from there on the healthcare side and tied it with the Supreme Court. So Affordable Care Act, it was duly Congress, and it was followed all the rules signed by the president into law. Then it has been all different courts had a say into that. It's back in the Supreme Court. Why would a court turn down a law which was duly passed by Congress?
Oh, first you're going to have to make me assume it's going to be turned down.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I don't know what the Supreme Court justice is going to do. It's unfair to say that this is what she's going to. I cannot get into her mind. I don't know what aspect of it, but it was not affordable to start with. And I think getting rid of the, I have a lot of nephews and nieces, and punishing them and fining them because they couldn't afford insurance was terrible. So we took away that from the Affordable Care Act. So it's not a perfect document. And the fact that you say, hey, we have to pass it before they know what's in it, they can read it afterwards. We have to pass it first. I'm thinking that's a little bit of backwards. I think we should understand what's in an act before it is. But we cannot assume that she's going to reverse that. I think
you're right. I'm not saying that they will reverse it, but I'm saying, but there are to be able for the Supreme Court to accept a case like that, there got to be sufficient support to accept that case. They don't accept every case over there, and there's a reason behind accepting a case like this. It has gone to some federal courts and all of that stuff, and it has been struck down and negative opinion and all of that stuff. So my point is really you mentioned about being a strict to the Constitution, stick to the Constitution, that the Congress passes the laws and the Supreme Court, everybody follows it. Supreme Court's or the Justice Department, or no, it's not a department. So judiciary, their job is to make sure that the laws are complied with.
Correct.
But it doesn't happen every time. There are always exceptions. I think affordable care, in my view, has been one of those. If the law has been passed at a federal level, duly by Congress, and become into law, and they have nipped at it, they said, this part is not constitutional, that part is not constitutional, and basically chipped away at it. And as a result of that, a lot of people in America depend on that. Pre-existing conditions were eliminated, big healthcare changes, and it will go backward if there's no support for this type of law.
Let me tell you, as your congressman, my job is to legislate. My job is not to send appellate cases to the Supreme Court. And if there are things that can be improved on or worked on, your job is to get off your butt and pass legislation to correct those inequities or those failings in legislation. If someone didn't do it right the first time, it's your job to legislate. So do your job as a congressman. You don't run to the Supreme Court for everything. That's not your job.
Well, thank you, Tony. It has been a good discussion, I think. So I will make that my last question. And thank you for coming and devoting your time, sharing your time with us and sharing your views on many different issues with us. And I thank you.
I like this format. I appreciate what you're doing. It's a growing community that needs to have someone have the ability to talk to the community. And this is the first opportunity I've had, and I really enjoyed it and I appreciate it. I think you do a great job, folks. And so thank you.
Thank you.
And Tony, so how do you say to your voters how they will remember you? Very briefly.
How do they remember me? I think one of the biggest free, if you say political pieces you have, is your statement of qualifications. A lot of people will put in there, well, I went to this school, I did this, and I'm great because of this, and I can do this. And I use that as who I am and what I'll do and what my principles and what I stand for. I think people want that from people. Now, the way I get my word out is I don't have the kind of money he has. He has tremendous money. He could target every household with 10 mailers if he wanted. And I am the poor representative candidate. And but someone once said, your Achilles heel is your candor. But no one will ever have to worry about getting a political answer from me. They're going to get an honest answer, and one that I think, as their representative, I should be giving them is the truth. So,
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tony. So I would encourage voters to please follow up with your questions with Tony or send us with the questions. We will share it with him for further clarification. So Tony, will you share with our voters where they can reach out to you for follow-up questions?
I will. I certainly will. I think that's part of the responsibility.
Sure. Okay, so Tony has a Facebook page. Please reach out to him there or ask us the questions. And please make an informed decision for November 3rd. And I sincerely appreciate, Tony, for your time and educating the voters as well as us with your vision, with the issues that you are seeing, and with the solutions that you want to bring to District 9. Thank you very much. Thank you, Hardy. And we'll.
Thank you.
Thank you, the two of you. I appreciate this opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you.